Whether you're conquering professional exams or personal milestones, we welcome you to Beyond Clean's Confidence Certification, the 52-week test prep podcast series. With expert insights, actionable tips, and engaging discussions, we'll break down the toughest concepts in sterile processing and build your confidence every step of the way. Join host Sarah B. Cruz as she embarks on a mission to help you not just prep for tests, but craft your success story. And now your host, Sarah B. Cruz.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to Confidence Certification, a 52-week test prep podcast series to equip you to take your sterile processing career to the next level. I'm your host, Sarah B. Cruz, and on this episode, we are going to be following up on a personal request from some of our listeners. Shoot, I can't even say just some. A multitude of listeners. After I had mentioned that I work with ADHD to prepare and, try to live in the professional world, and figuring out I had the issue, especially when I was failing my certification tests over and over again, that level of vulnerability really encouraged professionals to reach out to me via LinkedIn saying, can you speak more about this? And unfortunately, I cannot speak more about this because I am not a professional. I am not a doctor. I will not be your doctor this episode. And keep in mind, our special guest is also not your doctor. But our special guest is a doctor. Dr. Victoria Verlezza is joining us today as an expert in the neurodivergent experience, as both a scholarly expert and a lived experience expert. She serves as a consultant for organizations doing inclusion, diversity, equity, and access efforts. She has a PH.D. in human development from Fielding Graduate University and holds master's degrees in social justice education, higher education administration, and human development. She is passionate about holding space for others' learning journeys while also challenging the status quo. She has been working in the area of DEI for 20 years and has supported thousands in their learning journey in both internal and external facing roles. Everybody, Dr. Victoria Verlezza.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for joining us. And after reading your bio, you said a really popular Beyond Clean phrase, challenging the status quo.
That's how I live.
Yes. Well, you have found good company on this platform, let me tell you. And I am just so excited to bring you on to speak to our listeners today. Thank you again.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Now, before we get going and we talk all things neurodivergence, I got to ask you.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of sterile processing before?
Not before you.
Okay. That's not really uncommon, so it's okay. A lot of the times people don't know about us unless there's a problem. And I think that's something we're trying to change in the industry, especially on the Beyond Clean platform, really bringing sterile processing professionals to that forefront in patient safety. So thank you for being a part of that mission with us. Now, a big thing we talk about on the show is our study style and how we prefer to learn. What is your preferred study style?
Oh my gosh. It has evolved throughout my lifetime because obviously I have a PhD, so I was in school for a long, long time. When I was a very long time. When I was in high school, I didn't know how to study. When I was in grade school, it just was never something that came easily. Math is not something I am good at. I read really fast, but comprehension is not great. So I didn't really know how to even spell. So let me tell you a little trick. Listeners, I hope you like this. When I was young and trying to learn how to spell, my mom poured out salt on a dining room table and had me spell out words with my finger while also closing my eyes. And I am sensory processing. I do not like chalk, hate chalk.
Yeah.
And so she would say, close your eyes and imagine a pink chalkboard that doesn't feel like anything. So I would spell in the salt and then in my mind be spelling the word on the pink chalk. Totally out of nowhere. I don't know where she came up with this idea, but it helped me learn how to spell. So that was little. I was little. And then over time, it evolved. I needed to take notes. I needed to record things. I needed to read things multiple times. One of the things that really stuck with me throughout even getting my PhD was reading out loud to myself and then writing down whatever it was I thought it was. So that's probably my number one, especially because I was diagnosed when I was 8 with auditory processing disorder, which we now know was a misdiagnosis of autism and ADHD. They weren't diagnosing girls in the early 90s with autism unless we were very obviously, quote unquote, autistic. And I was not. High masking, high camouflaging. So the auditory processing, I thought was I needed things to be said, written, and I needed it to be heard. So like I needed multiple ways. So I would say my learning style is I need to read it, see it, and say it. And that way it sticks in my brain.
I like that. Read it, see it, say it. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And you used, so personally, I am a reader writer and I like to read and write while I'm reading it, even if I'm just writing what I'm reading, because I very rarely go back and look at that after I've written it. But because I've read it and wrote it while I was reading it, it's like locked in there. But it's funny that you said spelling because don't ask me to spell it. Don't ask me to spell it. I can't
do it.
I'm such a bad speller that I literally shut the spell check feature off while I'm writing because I want to edit the entire time I'm writing. So I can't even see the red squiggly line. I can't.
That's smart. That's really smart. I never thought of that.
Oh, I have to, or I'll spend the whole time editing myself and then I lose my train of thought. It's terrible.
That's a good tip.
Thanks. Well, I like the salt tip. Kudos to your moms. Like, shout out. Yeah. Snaps.
Good job, Mom.
So, but you use a lot of terminology while you were explaining that. So maybe that's a great place to start. You know, maybe you can give us an intro to neurodivergence, high masking, you know, auditory sensitivities, ADHD. So yeah, please take it away.
Oh my gosh, I would love to. So neurodivergence is the term. So neurodivergent with a T and neurodivergence with the ENCE. Those are folks who are not neurotypical. So neurotypicals are folks who are not diagnosed with anything under that umbrella. A lot of people think that neurodivergent equals autism. That is not true. Being neurodivergent is an umbrella term for having an experience that is something other than being neurotypical. For a long time, folks thought that if you were different in some way, that just meant that you were not as good, and being disabled is not something that folks were super open about. And you had to be like severe, right? Like it had to be very obvious. But what we're learning is being neurodivergent is auditory processing, it's sensory processing, it's bipolar, it's Tourette's syndrome, it's any depression, anxiety. The umbrella term is all encompassing. Dyslexia, which I have, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. All of these things fall under neurodivergent. So a group of people is neurodiverse because our brains are different. Neurodivergent, being neurodivergent, is having a different operating system. I usually liken it to Apple and Android. So a neurotypical has an Android, just because, and neurodivergent has an Apple, or an Apple processing system. Our brains just make sense of the world in a different way. It's not better or worse, it's just different. And a lot of folks think that being neurodivergent is something to fix. So when I say high masking, especially for a woman, I am a cisgender woman. I was born a female, and I also identify as a woman. And for me, I was taught I had to prescribe to very feminine socialization. So I, as you told your listeners, I have a PhD in human development. I have spent my entire life studying human behavior. That means I am really good at masking. And what that means is taking on traits of others and figuring out how to maneuver the world in a way that doesn't always feel, natural to me. So I'm maneuvering the world in a way that I am almost mimicking what I see with others. So like, I will ask friends, I just watched this movie. I don't really know how to feel about it. What was going on in this particular scene? Because I don't understand. I'm able to articulate that, and what they would call low support needs. We're getting away from functioning labels. So folks will say in the world like, oh, you're high functioning or low functioning. We're moving away from that. The actually adult autistic community who are highly verbal and being educated and being vocal in the disability space and the autistic space learnings are trying to have folks see that being high masking is not always a good thing. And so for me, being low support needs, I'm low support needs in a lot of ways, but in other ways, I can be very high support needs. For a long time, autism was thought of as a linear model. It's not. It's fluctuating, and there's circles out there with the diagram of areas that you may be higher or lower support needs. With ADHD, there's been a really cool progression of autism specifically. So if you look way back, you're getting into my special interest, so you're going to get all of the excitement.
Yeah, bring it.
If you go way back, the folks who were studied for autism were boys, white boys. And so we don't have a lot of information on how it looks, how autism presents in girls and folks who are not white. So what we're noticing is that for women and girls, our presentation is very different because we can mask, we can camouflage, we can almost make ourselves invisible in social settings unless we have very high support needs. So for me, folks often say, oh, I never would have guessed. And then they start talking to me and they're like, oh, there it is. This happened to me last week. I was at a yoga studio talking to a mom, and her son happens to be autistic. And she was like, oh, you don't look autistic. What does autism look like? Right, exactly. And I said, well, I'm low support needs and I high camouflage. And I started talking, and she looked at the yoga instructor and said, there it is. I see it. It's right there. And I said, well, you got me talking about my special interest. It's easier for me to have conversations like I'm having with you and your listeners than for me to go to a coffee shop and order a coffee. Mm-hmm. So it's that.
No, and I think that really brings us into the focus point on why so many of the listeners reached out and said, hey, can you talk more about that? Because as somebody that studies and lives these experiences, bringing you on is able to speak to their lived experience, right? Maybe, and again, we're not your doctors. Victoria is a doctor, but she's not your doctor. So this is not a diagnosis episode. Please, if you think this is something you're experiencing, go seek your medical professional, right? But at the same time, those words, ADHD, autism, the linear plane you were speaking about really is evolving. And it's something that we are starting to experience in the prepping of testing space. Right? So I think when we come back from a short break with our sponsor, let's speak a little bit more to how to prep our friends and get them to pass that test with confidence. We'll be right back, folks. It's time for our mid-episode confidence boost, where we focus on a key sterile processing test concept. Now, there's no guarantee these test concepts will be on the test that you take, but they are key concepts to the workplace and are discussed in the literature. Today, we'll cover biofilms. Biofilms are groups or collections of microorganisms and extracellular material that adheres to the surface of any object that it comes into contact with. As they continue to grow and multiply, they form a protective, slimy film that covers and protects them, making cleaning, disinfection, and even sterilization ineffective. Once biofilms form, direct friction and/or oxidizing chemicals are needed to remove it. That's going to wrap this week's mid-session confidence boost. Good luck. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. If you are just joining us, please restart this podcast episode because Dr. Verlezza was really dropping some very interesting information about neurodivergence and understanding study habits already just straight out the gate. So do yourself the favor, restart the episode because now we're actually going to be talking about some of those key phrases that were previously mentioned and how we can offer some actionable tips. All right. So, Doc, hear me out. Now, as somebody that experiences ADHD, I like to say experience and not lives with, because I like to joke that I am thriving in my attention deficit. So I am experiencing this in my life and we're going with it. I found some, I hate to say great coping mechanisms, but I've also found some really great routines that work for me. Just don't tell me I have to do something or I'm going to never, ever do it. I was going to do it, but now you told me to do it. So now I'm never going to do it. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, as somebody that experiences neurodivergence, how can we speak to preparing for taking a test more effectively?
So thanks for that. One of the things that I recommend the most is understanding what you as an individual need to be resourced and accommodated to take the test. So what you're talking about for yourself is you've figured out the mechanisms in place that you can best resource yourself to do X, Y, or Z. So for me, one of the things is understand, do you study better with music? Do you need to be in a coffee shop where there's non-distinct noise and movement going around? Are you someone who needs to sit in a quiet, dark room? Do you need to perhaps record yourself reading whatever it is and then listening back to whatever the material is? Are you someone who needs flashcards? So really taking a deep dive on what it is that is going to make you as an individual the most successful. Something that I did as a child, like middle school, high school, I realized that listening to music at night, I would remember the lyrics better. So if there was a test I really needed to study for, if I recorded it and played it overnight, I would remember the information differently than if I just read it to myself. So really being self-reflective and asking those deep questions. What is it that I need? How will I be able to thrive? Do you need to eat something? Do you need to not eat something? For me, if I'm getting ready for something that could have long implications, like a big exam, I probably need to do it on an empty stomach because I have a nervous stomach. So like really understanding your own bodily autonomy and understanding your environment and then trying to replicate that. So something that I've found with the kids that I advocate for and work with is that they need situations replicated. So if you are studying in your kitchen and it's silent, and then you're in a classroom, for example, taking a test, and if you are neurodivergent, chances are you hear everything. You're hearing electricity, you're hearing somebody's mouth sounds, you're hearing tapping, you're hearing the writing, you're hearing the teacher breathing, you're sweating because it's not the right temperature. Really understanding what it is that you need and trying to replicate that, but also remembering you have to advocate for yourself. So whether that be with parents, caregivers, teachers, whoever, it might not be a formalized IEP accommodation. However, someone should be able to replicate an experience for you. So while I had longer test times for my IEP or being taken out of the classroom, if someone doesn't have the means to be able to get an IEP, trying to work with a teacher or a caregiver or someone to meet whatever that need is, but really starting with yourself. What is going to make me feel the most successful? The other thing is, don't wear clothes that are going to bother you. Think about yourself in an environment and know that whatever you need to be the most successful is going to support you. So regardless of the study situation, you need to also have your body, your mind in a space to be able to succeed.
So now maybe we can speak a little bit more to how we can make the best of our surroundings, right? Like the current environment, you know, there's a long way to go with making test centers and other spaces a little bit more accommodating for our predicament, dare I say, right? You know, or a little bit more accepting of that. But at this point in time, I feel like a lot of the times neurodivergent individuals kind of just have to make the best of it, which, you know, stinks. But let's speak a little bit to how we can offer insight on how to make it work with what they got at this time. So we're in that testing center. I talked about how I don't like the big headphones. Like, what's something we can do there? Or then you got mouth breathers, like, you hear everything. Let's speak a little bit to how we can work with that surrounding. What do you think?
So folks could look at different alternatives. If big headphones over the ear don't work or earbuds don't work, you could look at the squishy concert type earbud. What are those called?
I call them ear inserts.
We'll go with that. An ear insert. Like you could look at getting or obtaining loops, which are silicone ear buds, I guess. And they're very cool because there's multiple levels of them. So I wear them to concerts, I wear them to movies, but I also can wear them at work. So if there's a lot of noise, the way they're designed is to focus the noise on what's in front of you rather than the peripheral noise. So if you're in a gym, for example, taking a test, or if you're in a big testing center with lots of other people, those loops might be really helpful because they are designed to minimize the peripheral noise and just make it so you can hear your own breath. Another tip that folks could start looking at or thinking about pre-test is, are there meditations or mindfulness practices they could start? They could think about breathing in for 4, holding it for 4, and then breathing out for 4. So are there things that folks can do? I don't know if this is allowed in a testing center, but fidgets. Can someone have something in their hand that could focus energy? Is it their favorite fidget? This is not my favorite fidget. For listeners, I am playing with a pink little pea pod, and I use fidgets everywhere because it focuses my energy. And then that breathing is so important, especially if you're autistic, because we can get irritated at the littlest thing. If someone is tapping a pen and it's bothering and you can't focus, you will become irrationally angry. So how do you stay focused? Maybe there's an opportunity for someone to work with a testing center to see the space prior to the exam so they can understand their surroundings a little bit more. Thinking about clothing options. Do you need to layer up? Is there something that you can do physically? Do you need to eat? Do you not need to eat? Do you need to always hydrate? But should you have water before? Like, what are your bodily function needs that's going to keep your brain in the game?
Those are, listen, if you are listening, rewind and start that, because those are awesome, actionable steps. That's great. And I speak in a later episode about a worry stone I like to keep in my pocket because it has like a deep groove. So that's how I bring myself back. So I like that you mentioned the fidget. And in many cases, you can go see the facility before your actual test date. And one of the things that I liked the most was that it had high sides. So if I just leaned forward, I couldn't see. So we're talking about addressing the hearing in our peripheral, but then you literally can't see in your peripheral. And I need that because if there's just even like the slightest sparkle, it's like, and I hate to say it, but it's like, I'm going to look at it and I'm not going to be able to focus. Or if there's slight movement, forget about it. I'm going to be more concerned with why that person's moving than answering the questions on my test. So that was just so great. And then just as we start to wrap the episode, do you have any specific resources you really like or anything that you can refer our listeners to that they could maybe get their hands on?
Lots of stuff on both Instagram and TikTok. There are a lot of folks who are out there talking about neurodivergence in a variety of spaces. I'm on LinkedIn and I put stuff up all of the time. I read everything. I don't know of any podcasts off the top of my head that specifically talk about neurodivergence. But there are movies, there's books. Dr. Devin Price's book about autism is great. The other things that I use, I'll Google a whole lot of stuff and see what I find. But I will say for this generation, and even for Gen Z and millennials and Alpha Gen, but social media is the place to go. So when you're on social media, especially with Instagram, if you go into the search bar and you just type in neurodivergence or autism or ADHD, there's lots of helpers out there ranging from how do you do school to how do you function in life. There's lots of therapists who are using those sites as ways to drive information. I also personally work with a coach who is specifically for my autism and other neurodivergent identities that I have, because I find having a coach who knows and understands my experience from multiple perspectives. She herself is ADHD and she has 3 autistic kids. She's able to translate for me, so I am able to function better and regulate my emotions differently. So not just a therapist, but I also have this coach who's specific, and there's lots of folks out there like that.
You know, and I will say that that's how we met, by the way, is LinkedIn. So there is power in social media. We talked a bunch of episodes about recognizing credible sources. So please just feel free to visit those, because it is true. You know, social media, it does bring people together. And like, you know, the good doc was telling us, it's important to have somebody that can speak to your language. And if you're not in a situation to get a coach, social media provides community. And a lot of the times, because, you know, like the term we used earlier, because we're not neurotypical, we may be lacking a community, right? So social media helps with that too. So one last big ask, Dr. Victoria. We assign homework on this show. If you had to give our listeners one homework assignment, what would you give to them?
Take a minute and think about yourself in time and space, and do a little self-reflection on what it is that you need to be resourced. And I don't use the word accommodate because that is a very specific word. What do you need to resource yourself, and challenge yourself to meet that need on a daily basis?
You know, and as we like to joke about, you'll never meet a more self-aware individual than someone with neurodivergence, right?
Facts.
We know we're just going to keep doing it, though. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes.
So as we wrap this week's episode, thank you all for joining us. Dr. Victoria, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. And like she said, don't be afraid of LinkedIn. We've been talking about that all season. Get out there and say, hey, yeah. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye. And that's going to do it for this week's episode. For more sterile processing education and resources, make sure to visit beyondclean.net or follow Beyond Clean on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget to check out over 1,000 SPD-related videos at youtube.com/beyondclean. If you have any questions or comments for the show, you can reach out to info@beyondclean.net. Finally, make sure to download the Beyond Clean mobile app on the Apple and Android app stores so that you don't miss a future episode of any of the other awesome Beyond Clean podcasts. My name's Sarah B. Cruz, and you've been listening to Confidence Certification. Until next time, keep fighting dirty and pass that test with confidence.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast series are of Sarah B. Cruz only and do not represent the companies she works for or collaborates with.